Hello everyone. Before this video begins, yes, I'm aware that it's been 2 months since I last did this series. However, there's a specific reason behind it though. To be honest, I was so more committed towards both Greyhaven's project and my both AI songs and tributes lately. Heck, I was so busy with those, I pretty much forgot about this series altogether. And also along with my train series called the Super 7. However, I do plan on re-continuing that series at some point. Super 7, I mean. I had to figure out when in particular. Maybe when I'm done with Greyhavens, who knows. Anyways, after looking back at what locomotives I want to cover next, I even made a community post on letting you a heads up on what locomotives I do plan on covering for this series. And of course, the first one, being General Electric's AC6000CW, or as I refer to it as, the AC6000 for short. In the 1990s, it was becoming apparent to railroads that freight trains were becoming longer and heavier. In the same case as Union Pacific's horsepower race in the 1960s, the railroads were using up to 5 to 6 units just for one train, even going as far as having back engines up to 3 to 2 units. The railroads found this as just intolerable, and so as such they contacted the Electromotive Division and General Electric to develop and build a locomotive that could produce 6,000 horsepower or more, while also sporting AC power traction, and also sporting a 6-axle co-wheel arrangement. Electromotive Division's offer became the SD90 Mac, followed by its little brother, the SD80 Mac. The SD80 Mac being the successor to the SD70 wide cabs, specifically the SD70M and the SD70 Mac respectively. However, as far as the SD90 Mac goes, one of its variations in question, the SD90 Mac-H, which were delivered to Union Pacific in 1996. However, these units are sadly short-lived when Union Pacific found out how unreliable the 265-H engine were. As such, these units were pretty much short-lived on Union Pacific's roster, being retired between 2005 and 2009. In some cases, the SD90 Mac, which was arguably a worse villain than the SD50, more on that locomotive later, might eventually get to that point. And of course, the SD80 Mac performing just as alright as its bigger brother. Originally being given to Conrail, both 28 units coming from Judiata shops in Pennsylvania, followed by them getting their hands into demo units from London, Ontario. They served Conrail well up until it split in June 1999, with 13 going off to CSX, later 12 after the incident involving CSX X4594, originally Conrail 4110, having a derailment in 2009 and brought the total down to 12. Norfolk Southern, meanwhile, got more units at a total of 17. But they were later acquired the remaining 12 units from CSX somewhere between 2014 and 2015. However, little did Electromotive Division not realize that their offer would become overshadowed by what General Electric had in store. Meanwhile, old General Electric, they've contacted Caterpillar and a German engineering company by the name of Woods MWM. Together, the three of them developed and built a 7FDL-16 engine that was incapable of producing 6,250 horsepower. And then they pretty much experimented on the AC4100 series, the successor to the Dash 9s, simply by experimenting with the pre-existing Dash 9 and just giving it AC power traction, and pretty much redesigned the locomotive from the ground up, specifically parts such as bottling, body, frame, fuel tank, and radiators, which eventually was the creation of the AC6000CWs. three prototypes came out in late 1995 of December. These include GCX6000, 6001, and 6002. 6000 was nicknamed Green Machine or Hulk by the General Electric workers. The other nickname, Hulk, is obviously meant to be a reference to Professor Hulk from the MCU. However, after the introduction, that was GCX 6001 and 6002. Later on, in 2000, number 6000 was later repainted in the same colors as red and silver to match their other two. They then later were sent to Union Pacific and other railroads for testing purposes. As it turns out, railroads were actually very impressed. As such, only 2 of the Class 1s here in the United States actually got their 3D hands on the 6000s. Those 2 in question being CSX, which brought a total of 117 units, and Union Pacific, which got the majority of the units at a total of 186 units. Oddly enough, Southern Pacific was also going to place an order for the AC6000s, 3 of them actually. However, the order was eventually cancelled when they found out that Union Pacific was going to be acquiring their railroad. So sadly, the order was eventually cancelled. Not to mention, they were just the same concept as the Dash 9s and AC4400s, just with the bodies a lot longer and with bigger radiators like their siblings. Additionally, the AC6000s also found work in foreign countries such as Australia, where they worked for a mining company known as BHP. Meanwhile, the ones over on CSX and Union Pacific actually had pretty bright careers, mostly being used on all types of trains like intermobiles, coal drags, manifests, hotshot tropical juice trains, list goes on. However, despite how powerful these units were actually sometimes deemed too powerful at times. What do I mean by that? Well, the units themselves had a pretty bad habit for ripping out couplers out of their sockets and destroying entire trains because of their excessive power and force. Many conductors on both Union Pacific and CSX's CC subdivision had indeed mentioned if there's a 6000 on a train, you get ready to tear that train apart. In fact, one CSX engineer recalled ripping out the coupler back of the train while trying to slow down hill helper duty. There have also been a series of other issues too, such as overloaded axles, the locomotive frame rattling, wheel slippage problems that resulted in there being giant tears being made on the rails. Strangely enough, it's also a similar problem that Electric Motor Division's SD70 Max also have, causing them to be nicknamed the Slip-O-Matic by crewmen and engineers. Eventually, it led both CSX and Union Pacific, somewhere in the start of the 2000s, to have the horsepower derated on their units. The ones over on CSX would be derated from 6,000 down to 4,600 horsepower, or 4,600, depending on how they pronounce your numbers. As such, they've been reclassified as CW46AHs, or other times been referred to as ES46ACs, after being repowered by a GEVO 16 engine to make them more environmentally friendly. So naturally, this makes the ones over on CSX to be classified as an AC4400 Evolution Series hybrid, only just 600 times more powerful than both those units combined. Union Pacific, meanwhile, had their units derated to 6,000 to 4,460, now being reclassified as AC4460CWs, which is why they got the nickname convertibles during that time. Oddly enough, Union Pacific did not repower these units with GEVO 16 engines, unlike their CSX predecessors. Probably likely because Union Pacific does not really care of the same things as Eastern railroads like CSX. Afterward, it was basically smooth sailing from that point after the derating or repower. However, with only a series of issues in terms of crashes. First, we have CSX 671 and CSX 5006 having had both their traction motors replaced after crashing themselves. Fun fact, by I should also mention that CSX5006 was also leased from Amtrak one time to use a passenger service. And of course, we also have CSX5000 that was seen violating G. And of course, this wouldn't be a complete AC6000 video if I didn't talk about Union Pacific 7312. Yes, I'm aware Cal Union Production has done an entire video discussing this movie in the past, but I want to make my own case on this locomotive. Long story short, it had an accident involving its entire cab completely obliterated. So as such, Union Pacific thought the best thing to do was take it to Norfolk Southern Territory and see what they can do about it. The result, it got a Norfolk Southern -9 style cab by having its headlight relocated to the forehead of the locomotive. Pretty much now just making it a Norfolk Southern -9 AC6000 hybrid. Oddly enough, it's still on Union Pacific's area as of the making and recording of this video. Good riddance that someone has their 6000 still in active service, unlike someone else. Which leads me to my next part of this video. Of course, when everyone's favorite CEO railroader, E. Hunter Harrison, took over CSX starting from 2017 in his unsustained push of forcing other railroads to endure precision schedule railroading, or as you call it, PSR for short, other railroads were cutting use of their locomotive usage. As such, all the older locomotives were basically decommissioned from duty and eventually locked away in storage in various yards, and slowly but surely being killed off. Thankfully enough, a good handful of them were eventually given off to Progress Rail, while the rest were sadly killed off. Thankfully, CSX does still have custody of the 3 pre-production model units, numbers 600, 601, and 602. And, surprisingly enough, 2 of the units, 601 and 602, had indeed been seen early this year, back as of January of this year. But CSX 602, meanwhile, was last seen since 2017, and it's unknown where it is now. It is also one of the few AC6000s in CSX's roster to receive the Yellow Nose 3 boxcar color paint job. Anyways, the majority of CSX's 6000s have been indeed sold off to Progress Rail, but are now used as foreign power for various Class 1s. Oddly enough, the Arkansas Missouri Railroad, aka A&M, was indeed seen with one of CSX's most diverse units, specifically 699. However, it has not been seen since 2020, and its whereabouts is left unknown. Oddly enough, just a year after Progress Rail acquired the units, which was January 2018, a year after, they became acquired by Western New York Pennsylvania Railroad, where the CSX heritage can still be seen thundering on for years to come. Until 2024, just last year, where they had to be forced to be returned to General Electric for an unknown reason. Speaking of 2024, sadly, all of CSX's AC6000s, minus the pre-production trio I mentioned earlier, had sadly been killed off as of last year. And yes, I'm not surprised or disappointed either how they even had to kill off GCX6001. Well, thankfully, a part of it does survive though. It's Bogey Trucks, which was given to 6002. Speaking of 6002, back in 2022, it was transported by a pair of twin CSX Jeeps to the Lakeshore Railroad Museum because CSX just so happens to be the only railroad that has access to this museum. It was transported by the twin GP diesel engine, and was later transported to the Lakeshore Railroad Museum later that same year. That also makes it the first modern AC traction locomotive to enter preservation, followed by Union Pacific 4141 and Burlington Northern Santa Fe, originally belonging to Burlington Northern, was also transferred to the Illinois Railroad Museum earlier this year as of July. I'm actually pretty happy that all these units got a chance to be preserved in preservation, despite being some of the more modern-day locomotives. Thankfully, General Electric still has custody of GCX6000, and it still retains its red and silver paint job. So, that now begs the question, what about the ones over on Union Pacific? Good question, I hear you ask, my dear viewers. When Union Pacific got the memo about precision schedule railroading, in 2018, they did a rebuild program for their AC6000s, now being reclassified as C44 ACMs, receiving an entirely new paint job altogether in the process. Kind of like the AC44 C4Ms over on Burlington Northern Santa Fe, but to a completely different extent. Because instead of being rebuild -9s, they're rebuild AC4400s and rebuild AC6000s. This now makes Union Pacific the only sole operator of the AC6000s, and it's safe to say that Union Pacific will keep their legacy thundering on for years to come.